Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, where we talk about historical drama series and films as windows to the past and mirrors of the present. I'm Michon Boston.
And I'm Tequina Boston. This is Revolution to Rights America at 250, a 10-episode podcast series from Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. Revolution to Rights takes you on a journey through America's 250-year history of advancing freedom and justice since the Declaration of Independence in 1776.
The historical dramas featured in Revolution to Rights tell stories of battles fought in the quest for freedom and the people whose collective actions and courage inspire us to move beyond remembrance and to take actions today to ensure freedom and justice for all. In this Revolution to Rights podcast, we talk with historian Anthony Cohen about the Underground Railroad and its legendary conductor, Harriet Tubman, as seen in the 2019 film Harriet. In 1996, Anthony Cohen personally retraced the journey of the Underground Railroad and self-emancipation by foot, rail, and boat from Maryland to Canada. His walk got the attention of Oprah Winfrey, who asked Anthony to prepare her for her role in the 1998 film Beloved, based on the Toni Morrison novel. Anthony Cohen is preparing to take the Freedom Walk again for the 30th anniversary of his first Underground Railroad walk and the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S.
The Underground Railroad is one of the most important freedom stories in U.S. history. Underground Railroad is the name for a series of local networks of people who helped enslaved Black people escape from the southern slave states to the free northern states and Canada from the late 1700s to the end of the Civil War in 1865. This network of men and women, Black and white, worked together to create routes, set up safe houses, and served as conductors to accompany freedom seekers to their destination. The people who were part of the Underground Railroad acted on their moral convictions and religious values, that slavery was an inherent evil, slavery laws were unjust, and slavery was a stain on a country that stated in its founding document about the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's no complete record of how many people escaped through the Underground Railroad because the network of people operated clandestinely and at great risk in defiance of the United States slavery laws like the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, which required that slaves be returned to their owners even if they were settled in free states.
Former enslaved persons like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, who took the dangerous road by following the North Star to freedom on the Underground Railroad, didn't end their journeys at its destination. They joined the movement to bring others to freedom and an end to slavery. Today, people in the U.S. and around the globe continue to build networks, create safe houses for freedom seekers, and work to protect their communities by challenging unjust laws. The Underground Railroad story is a source of inspiration for our times.
The 2019 film Harriet traces the escape from slavery to freedom of Minty Ross and her transformation into the iconic American freedom fighter Harriet Tubman. Haunted by memories of those she left behind, Harriet Tubman, portrayed by Cynthia Erivo, ventures back into dangerous territory on a mission to lead others to freedom. With allies like abolitionist William Still, played by Leslie Odom Jr., and the entrepreneurial Marie Buchanan, played by Janelle Monae, Harriet Tubman risks capture and death to guide hundreds to safety as one of the most prominent conductors of the Underground Railroad.
We begin our conversation about the Underground Railroad with Anthony Cohen. Anthony Cohen is a historian, author, and explorer of the American past. An early purveyor of experiential history, he launched his career in the spring of 1996, embarking on a 2-month, 1,200-mile journey to explore the Underground Railroad, the secret network that thousands of enslaved Black women and men traveled to attain their freedom. Anthony Cohen is founder and president of the Menare Foundation, a national nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Underground Railroad, and operates the Button Farm Living History Center, a 40-acre farm that depicts 1850s plantation life in Maryland. A link to Anthony Cohen's complete bio is available on the webpage for this podcast. Welcome, Anthony, to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we're delighted that we can talk to you specifically about the Underground Railroad as it relates to the film Harriet. And this is part of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters podcast series that we're calling Revolution to Rights, focusing on the 250-year history of the United States with regard to movements for freedom and justice, and using 10 historical dramas, of which the film Harriet is one. And Anthony, in our study of this history, what is revealed is kind of a perennial conflict between those who regard those life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness and the rights articulated in the Constitution as privileges for a minority versus rights for all. So we're curious to know, how does the Underground Railroad history relate to this revolution and rights in the United States? And what makes this history particularly relevant in 2026, which is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence?
Yes, 2026, I think, is a bit of a godsend in the political climate that we have, because we are fighting for all of those core principles laid out by the framers in 250 years ago. But America is always proof that we never fully achieve those lofty goals. But as Americans, we're constantly in pursuit of them. So I think it's a great time to talk about history. The Underground Railroad, in particular, looms large in that 250 years of history. I consider it to be the first civil rights movement, a human rights movement in the United States. It took its cues directly from the American Revolution and the founding principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the people who framed this ideal, many of whom were enslavers, landed gentry who could vote, hold office, pass laws that kept African Americans enslaved, were the ones who shouted about freedom the most. And their enslaved people were listening all the time and took those messages not only to the heart, but personally, and then used the rhetoric and transformed it into this belief that all people were endowed with these inalienable rights, if you can imagine that. So the Underground Railroad is a movement that was working to bring true the ideals of American liberty and independence. And we're still working on it today.
That's for sure. And give us a sense of what was kind of the time period of the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, so people escaped from the moment they arrived, or attempt to escape, to get to a place of liberty, whatever that was in their personal situation. But the Underground Railroad, as we know it, really emerged as a organized system of escape, loosely to highly organized, between the years of about 1830, 1860. That was a kind of the chief era. And the naming of the Underground Railroad came in the early 1840s, taking its imagery from the above ground railroad, which was a new technology about a decade old by then, still mysterious to people. So the idea that one day someone could be enslaved on a farm or plantation in the South, and then a week later could be sending a telegraph from Canada to their former enslaver, boggled the mind. It was as if they had gotten on a train and gone to Canada on an underground railroad. And so that period, that 30-year period, drew from earlier anti-slavery efforts that had its origins in the Revolutionary War and then the drafting of the Constitution.
Thank you.
Anthony, we talked earlier about Underground Railroad experiences. And, I recall one in 1980 that Oberlin college students took an experiential journey on the Underground Railroad Trail, Oberlin, Ohio being one of the Underground Railroad stops. You took an extensive journey from, I'm thinking, Maryland to Canada? Is that
Yes,
was that the route? Okay.
yes, that's true.
By foot, rail. Was there a boat involved?
Boat and horse and buggy.
And a horse and
Wow.
buggy. So, what inspired you to take this journey? I know there are people who like to recreate moments in history. We've heard of people recreating Civil War battles. There are people who are probably recreating Revolutionary War battles. But taking that Underground Railroad journey today means something totally different, I believe. What inspired you to do this? Because that's a commitment.
Yeah, it was a bit of a commitment. And even kind of before the Underground Railroad, I have to say, I'm a bit of a theatrical type person. And so, in my teens, friends of mine and I would reenact album covers, pose like musical heroes on their albums and snap pictures and stuff like that. But I was inspired first for the Underground Railroad in the late 80s when I started having an interest in my own family story, my own family history. My last name is Cohen, Cohen, which is a Jewish name, but I'm African American, and so are my parents, and none of us are Jewish. And so in 1989, I called my grandfather, my father's father, who was living in LA at the time, and I said, "Hey, Granddad, how did we get this name?" And that is what launched me into seeking out not only my family story, but as I started building my tree and finding, lost ancestors, if you will, I wanted to know more about the time and place where they lived and what their lives were like. So I turned from music. At the time, I had an import record business, and kind of just threw my hat into history. And while I was a returning student in 1993 to American University in Washington, D.C., I was given the task of writing about some aspect of African American history that had gone unrecorded. And I chose the topic of the Underground Railroad. I focused on my county, Montgomery County, Maryland, which borders Washington, D.C., and is 40 miles south of the Mason-Dixon line. I figured that the Underground Railroad was probably here. And so I'd spend weekends and evenings in archives pursuing what they call slave narratives, which were firsthand accounts by enslaved people who wrote their stories upon reaching freedom. Some of those narratives related to my location, my county. I found runaway notices placed by enslavers in an attempt to capture and have returned the people who escaped from them. And those ads listed roads that were used, methods of transportation. They called out named people who they had suspected were accomplices. They described aliases, costumes, the clothing, methods of transportation. All of a sudden, the Underground Railroad elements of it were revealed. And then I went to the courthouse and found cases of people tried and convicted in my county of harboring or aiding people to freedom who were put in prison and forgotten about and never made it into the history books. Finally, I looked to archives and places in the North, the locations people went to, and learned about those freedom seekers' lives after escape, how they lived in freedom, how they told their story to successive generations. And so the Underground Railroad was actually there. During my brief study of 6 months, was able to document over 30 points of interest related to the Underground Railroad in my county, 3 safe houses I was able to document, and 6 routes of escape. And then
Wow.
1996, while had 2 months between jobs, I decided I was going to walk one of those routes. And so I embarked from Sandy Spring, Maryland, on a 6.5 week journey to Canada, passing through Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, kind of, and then New York, up the Hudson River, and then west along the Mohawk to the Niagara frontier. And that's kind of what inspired my journey, was piecing together one bit of history after the other, and then putting one foot in front of the other and trying to trace its path by walking it.
I do want to ask you, what were some of the particulars of that path? I mean, did you have your own rations? Did you forage food? That was one of the things we thought about when we saw the film Harriet. It was like, we want to see more of the details of that journey on the Underground Railroad, because
Yeah.
it was not the safest way, beyond the people who were out to recapture um, self-emancipated people. It was the elements itself, and if you didn't
Yeah.
know the terrain, it was quite a challenge and could be quite dangerous.
Absolutely. I think the first thing to know is, for the people who actually built the Underground Railroad and traveled it as enslaved people, these were people who lived on the land. And so they knew its power, they knew its fury, they could intuit deeper meanings in the landscape. They could know the time by the position of the sun, like, indigenous people around the world have known for millennia. So they weren't separate from the environment they were going through. Of course, that changed as they advanced, as the terrain shifted. And so on my journey, when I started out, it was really kind of like a philosophical question I was trying to answer. What can this be done? Can you follow a physical path and recover history along that route? What would I find? Where are the communities that existed at that time and may have aided or sheltered self-liberators? What's happening in those places today? So I wanted to go out. I wanted to test this theory that I could recapture history by walking it. I wanted to talk with people, kind of, the traveling archivist, oral historian. Though I didn't collect many oral histories, I really didn't know I would find. And so the journey from Maryland to Philadelphia was really, kind of getting my sea legs, if you will, adjusting to the road. I walked 10 to 25 miles a day, which was equals about 3.5 hours to 12 hours for the full day. And I'd stop in the towns along the way and ask people what they knew. And I frequently had to come up with my own methodologies on the spot. So, for instance, in a small town, I would always stop at a library, historical society, or museum if they had one, and ask what information they had. In lieu of that, I would stop at a post office in a small town, because the postmaster always knows who the oldest person is or who the town historian is. I would stop at a realtor's office in a small town because they knew the history of the oldest homes in the community, and on several occasions would call up the homeowners who were living in former Underground Railroad safe houses and say, hey, this guy is walking to Canada. Let him in your basement. And I was then able to see the actual hiding places. So for the first part of the walk, it was kind of form and function. How did this thing work? What's left of it? How can I tap into it? On the second part of the walk, I was in Philadelphia and I was speaking to some school children at a Quaker school called Plymouth Friends School, just outside of Philadelphia. And the students were asking me about my walk, what's in your backpack? And do your feet hurt? And how do you go to the bathroom? Right? Which is, of course, the favorite question.
Yes, yeah.
We ask those questions too.
Yes. Well, on the last one, I always say, fortunately, history does not record those kind of things. But one student asked me, what was the greatest escape on the Underground Railroad? There's always a curveball question, and I said, well, I'm not prepared to answer that because there were so many escapes, estimates between 30 and 100,000 during that 30-year period. So who knows what all those stories were? But I told them my favorite story, and that was the escape of Henry Box Brown. I figured it was a good story to tell since I was in Philadelphia, and he had shipped himself in a wooden crate from Richmond to Philadelphia. And the kids were just rapt. How did he breathe? Did he have food in the box? And of course, how did he go to the bathroom? And by the time I'm telling this story, the story of my walk is broken in the media. It's being covered regularly. When I arrived in Philadelphia, I got a call from where I was staying from NPR. Alex Chadwick interviewed me for Morning Edition, which is pretty cool. And so the public interest and all the little speaking gigs that I was getting along the way were slowing me down. So I was actually about 5 days behind on my walk schedule. And my next destination was New York City. And I was like, how am I going to make up this time? How am I going to get there in time? And then I thought about Henry Box Brown. And I'm like, well, he got in a box and rode partway on a train. What if I just take the train from Philly to New York? That's legitimate. That's part of the route. And then I thought, well, what if I were to get a box, be inside the box on the train? And so I had friends in Philadelphia and a couple of friends come up from Washington, D.C. that weekend, and we hatched this idea to smuggle me on an Amtrak train inside of a crate a la Henry Box Brown.
That's amazing.
And I won't tell you the whole story, but I will just say hottest day of May. It was 89 when I got in the box in the morning, and it was 99 in New York when I reached the city. The box was mislabeled, almost not taken off the train in New York City. There was a paperwork, and they didn't know I was in the crate. So after that point, going in the box to get a sense of what the journey might actually be like, then my focus shifted. I was still meeting people, I was still collecting documentation, but I was trying to move from the intellectual terrain to the emotional terrain. What did it feel like for making this journey? Could I step inside of their orbit, if not inside their heads? And I can't say I stepped inside anyone's head, but I was definitely pulled into that orbit and got a taste, an aroma of what some of those escapes must have felt like.
Can you recall any of the emotions? Back in 2013, I went on a pilgrimage to Ghana, West Africa, and part of that was going through the experience of those who were captured, enslaved, and marched to the slave castles, and then, looking through the door of no return. And it was the first time I emotionally kind of understood what it must have been like one, to see an ocean for the first time, and two, to know that you're going someplace and you have no idea what's on the other side of that ocean. So I guess I have two questions. The first one is, can you recall the emotions that you had? And then I'll ask the other question.
As I walked the journey, I was going to places, states, cities that I had been to before, but by car or by train, not in a box. So I had an expectation of where I was going, how long it would take me to get there, where I would stop, or what I would see along the way was up for grabs. But the original people who went on the Underground Railroad were going into the great unknown. And it's interesting, you talk about Ghana, you talk about the castles, the door of no return. I think of the Underground Railroad as a type of middle passage because you're going from the known to the unknown. You cross the Atlantic and everything's kind of a mystery. Nature is howling. The storms, the raging ocean, which many enslaved people carried from the interior of Africa. I'd never seen anything like this. So I find its counterparts on the Underground Railroad. And once you reach freedom, you've stepped through the door of no return because you're in a place called freedom, whether that's free soil, which isn't really free, but for another time, or you've established a place where you can live as a free person with a free identity, but you can't go back. So all your family and friends are likely behind you. The life that you've always known is behind you. The land that you labored upon with your blood, sweat, and tears that someone else called their own, right, is behind you. And there you are. So the parallels, I think, are rather striking. And I felt all through the journey different emotions of joy, deep sadness, and sometimes just the sense of unknowing, if that's a word, just not knowing what was going to be next. And that was very humbling because if I was feeling any of those things, the freedom seekers, the self-liberators, must have been experiencing those things 100-fold.
Yeah, yeah. The other part of that pilgrimage for us was the preparation. We learned history, we learned about culture, we learned about the terrain we were going into, and also we were psychologically prepared for what we might encounter and what we might experience during that pilgrimage. Michon and I both are interested in knowing how you prepare people for the immersive journeys that you put together and take people on, so that it is a meaningful experience and not, we treat so many experiences now almost like theme park, escape room, etc. But you're using these experiences to teach and have people engage actively with history. So talk a little bit about how you prepare people for these journeys.
Yeah, so there are two kinds of experiences I think we're talking about. One that takes place at our center of operation, which is the Button Farm Living History Center in Germantown, Maryland, about 20 miles outside of Washington, D.C. Our system here is hands-on history. We use objects and we use the landscape to tell the story of enslavement and freedom. We use what we call second person interpretation, which is a bit of a rarity in the interpretive world, but first person interpretation. Say if someone's portraying George Washington, first person would be, I'm George Washington, the founder of your nation. Welcome to Mount Vernon, or wherever it's going to be. Third person, welcome to Mount Vernon. I'm your docent for today. And today we're going to learn about the country's founding through the story of General Washington, who became president, and his family here at the farm. Second person interpretation would be, we hand you the axe, point out the cherry tree, ask you to chop it down, and then come back and tell us what the experience was like. And by the way, full disclosure, there was no cherry tree. That's
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we're up to date on that.
which is one of the reasons that we do second person interpretation. And, we put that history in their hands and have them cipher the past by doing stuff. So at our farm, we have historic outbuildings. We have a large kind of half-acre museum garden. We have heritage breed animals that you would have found on a plantation, all set on 40 acres. And we have a large collection of hands-on history tools from the time period. And so guests, school groups, whoever who come out, get a little background on our nonprofit, what our mission is. And then we put them to doing some kind of task on the farm that ties into a historic task. And they use the tools and they get their hands dirty. So we have elementary school kids who come out and plant, cultivate, and harvest 19th century cash crops. And that's when history comes alive, because those experiences provide all the elements that are between the lines of what you find in a history book or a textbook. It kind of colors in the blank spaces.
You've been enjoying Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast where we talk about historical drama films and series as windows to the past and mirrors of the present.
Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. Share the excitement with your friends. Visit MichonBostonGroup.com/Boston Sisters. Join the historical drama community by signing up for our e-newsletter so you'll never miss an update, future episodes, or exclusive bonus content.
Now, back to our fascinating conversation.
Well, Taquina was talking about preparation, and you did prepare someone many people are familiar with, that is Oprah Winfrey, for her role in the 1998 film Beloved, which is based on the Toni Morrison novel. And actually, that novel was inspired by a real-life story of Margaret Garner, who escaped to Ohio. And I mentioned Oberlin before. I've actually been in an Underground Railroad site, which was basically a cellar with a back door. But we were also introduced to that story of Margaret Garner. Tell us about how you were preparing Oprah Winfrey for this role, because this is about a woman who has gone to the other side of that enslaved experience and escaping from her enslaved life to freedom in Ohio. I think the story starts in 1873. So what was the preparation with Miss Oprah Winfrey like, and what did it entail? What was she looking for in terms of portraying? Is it Sethi? Seth?
Yeah, I believe Setha. Yeah.
Setha, yeah.
So first of all, I met Oprah as a result of my 1996 walk to Canada. On the last 10 days of my walk, Smithsonian Magazine followed me and did a great story that came out in the publication. And Oprah's cameraman read the story and handed it to her and said, "Here, we got to get this guy on the show." And in fact, the episode I was on aired, I believe, October 16th, 1996. It was an entire show about Spike Lee's new movie at the time, Get on the Bus, which was about the Million Man March, which was a year to the date prior to the release of the movie. And so they had about 50, TV minutes worth of time accounted for, but they still needed a 10-minute gap. And Oprah's cameraman said, this is the gap. This is the bridge from slavery to the present. So let's get him. So I get this call from Harpo. I'm invited out. Was absolutely thrilled. Well, thrilled to meet Oprah, but also, she had at the time, still does, one of the largest platforms, in the world for communication. So I knew the story of the Underground Railroad was going to get out. So I go. I'm on her show talking about the walk. I had footage of it. She made a replica of my crate for me to get in and crawl out of. It was really, it was a lot of fun. And then during a commercial break, she just leans in and she says, I just bought the rights to Toni Morrison's Beloved, and I'm going to star in it, playing the lead character, Setha, who escapes on the Underground Railroad. She said, I want to do just what you did. I want to walk the walk and taste the taste and smells the smells. And I'm thinking, knock yourself out, babe. You just enjoyed that walk. And then you think I'd be excited, but she said, can I contact you when I'm ready? I'd like to get some help from you, some kind of experience, which terrified me. But of course I said, oh, absolutely. And so 6 months later, when Beloved was in pre-production, I get this call, and it was first from associates who strangely asked me, I'm trying to reach Anthony Cohen. Yes. Anthony, I think you'll remember you were on the Oprah Winfrey show a few months ago. Yeah, I remember. Highlight of my life. It was incredible. And so they wanted to book something, but we couldn't figure it out. So finally, after a couple of calls, Oprah gets on and says, I need some kind of experience, something that's going to inform me of my role. And she said, I don't want to go to a museum. Yeah, we can walk, for a day, but, is that what's going to give me knowledge of the character that I'm portraying? And so I came up with the craziest idea right on the spot. I said, well, if you really wanted to do this, we should get an old plantation, convert it to its 1850s appearance, bring in actors and reenactors to portray the people of the past, bring you down blindfolded, transport you to the plantation, change you into slave clothing, and when the blindfold comes off, you'll be in the year 1850, and you'll have to interact with the people and go on a simulated underground railroad. I think in the back of my mind, I was hoping that would scare her and we could just get together for lunch.
Scares me.
I thought
No, thank you.
I thought I was clever, and she said, that's exactly what I want to do. And then I'm like, where am I going to find this plant to myself? Where am I going to find a plantation? Where are these people? But what I learned quickly is when you tell people that Oprah is coming and they have an opportunity to contribute something to her story, anything and everything you need comes. So we got her here to Sandy Spring, Maryland, the same place, Quaker Village, where I started my walk a year and a half earlier, and a year earlier, and used an old plantation that's there, and then 50 acres of cornfields surrounding it, and then stream valley leading into about 3,000 acres of parkland. That was going to be our setting. So I pulled friends in. I stopped one person in the grocery store. I'm like, yeah, he looks like he's from the 1800s. Hi, let me introduce myself. And actors and reenactors, and we recreated the past. We did bring her in. We blindfolded her. When the blindfold came off, there she was in the middle of this 50-acre cornfield by a little stream. And she we were going to throw everything at her. I remember when I was on her show and got in the box, she made a comment like, I'd have to stay on the plantation because you wouldn't get me in a crate like this. And so as soon as we got the green light for the immersion, the first thing I did was call a carpenter friend of mine, send him a picture of me in my crate and said, make one for Oprah. And so we were going to put her inside this crate, inside of the back of a horse-drawn wagon, all of which we got, and carry her for several hours across the landscape at night. I brought in a guy with bloodhounds from Western Maryland to track her in the woods at night. She's going to have to sleep the first night in the loft of a barn and the second night in a cave. I mean, it's Oprah. Can't say no to Oprah, so we're going to throw everything at her. And she just gave herself over completely to the process. And that's the real power that Oprah has, her willingness to give herself over to a process. You could say, give herself over to the great unknown. That's right there, emblematic of the spirit of the people who went on the Underground Railroad. Boldly forging where others had not gone before. And later, after the immersion, she said that in preparing for Beloved, that she had this personal experience, this immersion experience, and it, among other things, made her realize that her show was the greatest tool that she had for social change. And then she started bringing in, after Beloved, Oprah's Angel Network, the Choose Your Life Award, Remembering Your Spirit, and the whole Change Your Life TV that she did for another decade. So we were just really, 2 decades, really proud to be one page in the enormous volume of her life.
So tell us how the Menare Foundation does this. I mean, I think that's part of the mission. So tell us about the Menare Foundation, what you're doing with it, and what you hope to accomplish in terms of collecting the stories of freedom seekers on the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, so first of all, the Menare Foundation was formed in 1999. And it came as a result of that just direct few years walking and working with Oprah and all of the interest around that ensued. And I just thought, I could just write a book, or I could do something that would keep this momentum going. And so I chose the nonprofit. And then people kept asking about the immersion experience. And so it's like, got to have a place to do that. And so looked for a location. And that's how we ended up establishing the Button Farm Living History Center. Our main goal is to preserve the Underground Railroad and to use history as a spark for human potential. History, in our assessment, has an amazing power and ability to release or unleash greatness. When you know what people have gone through, when you know how people have evolved, sometimes devolved to this point, it really spurs the imagination, the heart, and the will to do better. So, that's kind of our mission. How do we do that? We have a theme called Ride the Underground Railroad, RIDE. Ride means the R is for restore what is in danger of destruction, preserve and maintain what is left of the Underground Railroad environment, safe houses, transportation routes, restore that history for future generations. The I is for interpretation. So history does not tell itself. Objects can't speak for themselves. So how do you tell the stories about those people and those places? That's what we call historical interpretation. So it's bringing the story of slavery and the struggle of freedom to life. There's documentation. Even today, people say, well, we think this was a safe house, or we think we had a family member, but there's no documentation. There is so much documentation and so much that has merged over the past 30 years. Like just one example, William Still, a station master, so to speak, in Philadelphia, operated an underground railroad station for about a decade. Harriet Tubman was one of the luminaries who passed through on several occasions, and he had hundreds of people travel through his station, and he kept a diary with all of their. He had these account books, and he recorded the names of the people who went through, the aliases they were using or took on after they left his station, where they came from, who had enslaved them, how many family members they left behind, what prompted them on their journeys. And so documentation is out there. But then what do you do with documentation? Well, you share it with others. And that's where the E for education comes in. Educate people about the Underground Railroad movement, its relevancy in the modern world through the creation of our interactive programs, lectures, publications. We run a tour company as well, and we serve as consultants on documentaries and films, and are occasionally invited to speak on podcasts.
Well, I want to go back to the Oprah Winfrey experience because it is a story of transformation. And on the Menare Foundation website, there's a place where you identify 5 steps for understanding freedom seekers, starting with vision, determination, discernment, faith, and transformation. And that came, I understand, from a publication called The North Side View of Slavery, published in 1856 by Benjamin Drew. I'm interested in how you see those 5 steps speaking to our own time and how we might apply them today as freedom seekers.
Yes. Well, first, the publication that inspired me to write the piece was called the North Side View of Slavery, and it was a collection of interviews with mainly American freedom seekers who had escaped to Canada in the years before 1855. And Harriet Tubman was one of those people interviewed. In fact, I believe it was her first interview in print, and it was very short. And also someone who I later discovered was my great-great-granduncle from Savannah, Georgia, who had escaped. His narrative was in there.
Wow. Nice.
And Drew was from the Boston area. I believe he was a writer for the Atlantic Monthly at the time. And he went north to collect these narratives because a few years earlier, Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin had been published. And it was a literary tour de force, but it also prompted a lot of controversy because people claimed, what could this Northerner know about enslaved people in the South? And so, Southerners kind of cast her as this literary fraud, and that she made up scenarios that just didn't exist. And so after the criticism, she publishes a second book, not a work of fiction, but nonfiction, called A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin. And what she did was she took all of her characters and she published all of her source notes, letters, firsthand accounts.
Her clip notes.
Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't the skinny, you can read it during lunchtime clip notes. It was the telephone book clip notes. And that shut up a lot of her critics. But then writers, both North and South, started writing their own versions of what the nature of slavery was like. Drew decided, the heck with traveling south. Let me go to Canada. Let's get this straight from the horse's mouth, from the people who made the journey. And so he did that. And this is a book that I pull narratives for all sorts of things. over the years. But I was asked by the National Park Service to write a piece for a collection on understanding freedom seekers. And so what I did was I started going through the book and just looking for common themes. And these were the 5 themes. By the way, there were 12 themes at first, and then there were 7, and then there were 6, and then we edited it down to 5. But yes, 5 things that could have been and were present in different people's journeys to freedom. One was vision, the ability to see oneself as free, even while enslaved. Determination, which was possessing the will to pursue it. Discernment, finding a way to achieve freedom or to get to freedom if you're talking about it in sense of geography. 4 was faith, channeling inner strengths and higher powers. And the 5th one was transformation. And this took place when people got to Canada, when the shackles were no longer attached to them, when they had to build themselves up again from scratch. Transformation, the ability to reinvent oneself. And so once I had the 5 steps, I pulled different examples of those from different narratives, all from people in Drew's book who had made it to Canada. So I wanted there to be a common denominator, and that was it, Canada, and that they were all there at the same time being interviewed by Drew.
Yeah. You know, what really drew, that's almost right. It felt like the one description feels like a metaphor for our time. And, you know, we always hear about follow the drinking gourd and the North Star. And I read, what do you do when the North Star is hidden behind clouds? How do you navigate the terrain and still keep going in the direction towards freedom, towards the North? And it just feels like we're also in a time where we know that there's some place that we need to direct ourselves, but we're not quite sure what our North Star is.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, great question. Yes, one person described, and by the way, the North Star is a main character in many slave narratives, many authentic accounts, because people knew about the stars. But in one account, a man traveling, I think it was out of North Carolina, said that on nights where the sky was obscured, he couldn't see the North Star. So what he started doing was traveling, the roads at night. If it was clear, he would travel until dawn, at which point he would leave the road to sleep in the woods during the day. But before entering the woods, he would take a stick and place it at the side of the road in the direction of the North Star, in the event that he woke up the next evening and the sky was obscured. These people were no dummies. They were brilliant. They were creative, constantly had to do workarounds, both on the road and preparing. They learned a lot of this stuff while they were still on farms and plantations and villages and big cities, wherever they were enslaved. They were perpetually thinking about freedom, either there or somewhere else.
Anthony, what can you recommend to our audience to do during 2026 to find their North Star, to find the stories of freedom seekers and the networks that they were a part of or assisted them to freedom, whether it is in their own communities, with the Menare Foundation, or other resources?
That's a great question. And there's a couple of things I would suggest. First of all, we are entering the year of commemoration, 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And that commemoration should be about the full 250 years, not 1 year, not 1776. That's kind of the start of the story, you might say. One incredible resource is the National Park Service's Underground Railroad Network to Freedom. So Google the website. The network was launched in 1998 to interpret the story of the Underground Railroad through the National Park System. And then it was expanded to include regional, non-parks programs, local history, I think some publications, tours, activities, some reenactment. But you got a big map. You can just look at the areas around you and go support those historic places and those programs, because that's going to continue to strengthen the National Park Service even at a time when they're under threat. When you go there and you to any national park that has the story of African American history, First Nations history, women's history, any history at all, and you find signs that have been taken down or language that has been whittled down so much that it practically means nothing, complain. Have your voice heard. Demand full and complete storytelling and inclusive storytelling. So that's really important. What I'd also say is look at the things that you do in life, that you've done, and what your passion is. At the beginning of 2025, I kind of felt um, that there was a lot of disheartened people, economics, politics, social stuff, whatever. So almost a year ago to today, I was thinking, what can I do to make a difference? And I went through a 2-month process. Well, here's something I enjoy doing, and here's something I'm good at, and blah, blah, blah. And then it dawned on me, Toni, you walked to Canada. You preserved history. Why don't you walk to Canada again? And then I looked at the calendar and I'm like, wait a minute, 2026. It's going to be the 30th anniversary of my 1996 walk. Perfect.
Wow, perfect.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yes. And so I decided I was going to walk to Canada again this year. I partnered with an organization called Coming to the Table, which is commemorating its 20th anniversary. And Coming to the Table was formed to have the descendants of enslavers and the descendants of the enslaved come together, and has been doing great work ever since. And so they're coming on to support the walk along with their parent organization, which is Our Joy, Restorative Justice for Oakland Youth. So we're all teaming up to make this walk happen. And so I will be walking from Sandy Spring, Maryland, in Montgomery County, Maryland, on May 4th, which is 30 years to the day of my original walk, and traveling 750 miles through Maryland, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, this time not in a crate, New York, and then crossing the Niagara into Canada on July 1st, which is Canada Day. So to give our neighbors to the north some love and to strengthen ties between us and our Canada. And then in the formal walk, it looks like it'll be in Toronto. So we'll celebrate our nation's birthday in absentia. I'm sure there will be a Frederick Douglass speech in there somewhere.
At least one.
At least one.
It's a nice time to be in Toronto,
Yeah.
July.
Yeah.
Yes. And it absolutely speaks to our time. It involves a dark historical past,
Yes.
but a past that led to light and hope. It involves borders,
Yes.
immigration, migration, the struggle of race in America, all the elements from from then are still around us, but it's really going to be an opportunity for people to come together. So we want smiles on people's faces. We want community and communion. One of the things we're going to do is every week of the 8 weeks on the road, we'll establish a base camp in a different city or environment. So Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, Poughkeepsie, Albany, Utica, Syracuse, Auburn, Rochester, and Buffalo/Niagara. We'll have a walk team that'll be traveling about 12 miles a day, mainly in the morning. And then the rest of the day will be out in those communities, visiting historical sites, doing presentations, recording community members. On the weekends is when we'll have community, what we're calling activation days. And so that'll give the chance for the community to come walk with us. We'll do service projects in whatever community we're in, have presentations, performances, and so forth. One of the most exciting things about the walk is we have a special guest joining us on the walk, and that is the Harriet Tubman Journey to Freedom statue, which is an 8-foot tall, 13-foot long bronze statue of Tubman that had been traveling the country since 2019. And so we'll have her on a flatbed, almost like a parade float, and she will come along the entire journey and be a kind of gathering point for us to remember and celebrate some great American history, and maybe make history ourselves.
Absolutely. Anthony, thank you for joining us on Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. We're looking forward to all the programs of the Menare Foundation and what you're doing with the walk to bring the Underground Railroad into our space, historical space, and our attentions today.
Yes, and if it's okay, I'd just like to invite everybody to come to Menare.org. That's MENARE.org. And you'll see the portal for the walk and find ways that you can be involved and be with us on the road. And gosh, I just want to thank you both for this opportunity. Encourage everybody to see the movie Harriet. And yes, and to have a great 2026 and spread as much love and hope as we possibly can.
The 2019 film Harriet, about the iconic American freedom fighter Harriet Tubman, is directed by Casey Lemons and features Cynthia Erivo, Leslie Odom Jr., Joe Alwyn, and Janelle Monae. Do an online search to find out where you can stream Harriet. Also, check your local library.
In our next Revolution to Rights America at 250 podcast, we talk with Frank Smith, Executive Director and founder of the African American Civil War Museum in Washington, D.C., about the film Glory and the history of African Americans who fought in the United States Civil War.
The South has always defined the Civil War as a northern invasion. So if there was any black soldiers, like Massachusetts 54th, all came up north. There weren't any local people serving in this army. And that's the lie they told themselves. They never wanted to admit that 3 out of 4 of these soldiers came off those plantations. They were enslaved on those plantations. And these people joined the Union Army, fighting their way to freedom. And in most cases, by the way, after the war, they go back to those same plantations where they had been enslaved. They go back now as free people.
Has this podcast made you more curious about American history, freedom movements, and visiting sites where history comes alive? Sign up for our Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters newsletter to receive Revolution to Rights America at 250 resources to engage, reflect, and be the first to know about in-person and virtual meetups with the Boston Sisters.
Subscribe to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters on your favorite podcast platform to be notified about the Revolution to Rights series and more podcasts spotlighting recent historical dramas.
Thank you for catching this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. We hope you enjoyed our exploration of captivating historical films and series dramas. Find us on Instagram at Historical Drama Sisters and on Facebook at Historical Drama Boston Sisters.
We want to hear from you. What historical dramas are you watching? Share your favorites. We may feature them in a future episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Visit our website at michonbostongroup.com/Boston Sisters and share the podcast with fellow historical drama enthusiasts.
Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters is brought to you by the Michon Boston Group. The views and opinions expressed on Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters are those of the speakers and do not represent the positions or views of the Michon Boston Group, its clients, or affiliates. This is Michon Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston.
Thank you for listening.